Welcome back. This is lecture series number 2. Well done for working your way through series number 1. Let's get stuck in. Resource management planning, and this is the first session. Just a reminder, there's 10 sessions per theme or per lecture series, and this one is business factors. Just a reminder, yep, you're still stuck with me. This is me. Do have a look if you want to have a snoop. These are the module learning outcomes. We've pretty much covered the first one in our first lecture series, understanding human resource management. We're now going to jump into how to plan. So again, just an assessment reminder. I'm not going to keep showing you these. I'm not going to keep bugging you about it. But right at the end, session 10, we'll make links again to all the content we've covered in this lecture series that helps you to be able to do this assessment. These are our themes. We've done theme 1 or lecture series 1, the role of HR. I've crossed it out. We're now moving on to the second lecture series or the second theme, human resource management planning. So for this particular session, we're addressing the learning outcome around human resource planning, but also the assessed criteria, thinking about the business factors that influence the plans that we make. Just a reminder that this is our core textbook, and here we are in session 1, business factors. Resource management. So in terms of all the general functions, recruitment, selecting, training and development, appraisals, reward, what does this look like in an ethnocentric, parent country nationals, polycentric, the host country nationals, or geocentric, nationals from all over the place? In most cases, a lot of companies have geocentric, but they may have a larger percentage of host country or parent country. This creates huge complexities in terms of human resource management. And it is an aspect that we need to consider in terms of business factors that will influence and shape our human resource management strategy. More of this in session 9 when we'll look at international human resource management. But this is just one example of some of the factors be shaping and driving. Again, another model in terms of cross-national human resource management that again may help you to think some of this through. What's the national culture? So again, using, for example, Hofstede's insights, thinking about the differences in terms of those kind of dimensions. National institutions and business systems. What are the legal structures? What are the policies around this? We'll come back to this in a minute in terms of the amount of national freedom they have or the amount of government intervention or control that takes place within those environments. We're thinking about the sector, the demands, how healthy those particular sectors are that you are moving into, particularly into a host country market. And you're thinking about the dynamic, right, the constantly changing business environment. Again, political shifts and so on and so on. We'll come back to these a little bit later in terms of some of the instruments that are available to help us think about this. But in terms of this slide, let's think about what we covered in lecture series 1. How does Porters get involved here? Are we trying to be a cost leader? Are we trying to differentiate? And what does our employees look like if we're going to be taking those kind of structures, that kind of strategy? Think about Ansloff's matrix, new markets, new products. What are those markets? What do those markets look like? And what is the demand for those products? What does the sector look like for those products and or services? Or are we looking at a cross-national, international human resource management strategy where we're focusing on the resource-based view? We're thinking about our value chain. We're thinking about creating something which is unique to the organization and giving our employees a huge stake in that function. Again, is that allowed, in inverted commas, within those national structures? to think our way through that. Of course, a major big factor is labor markets. And every country is different. Every region is different. Again, in the UK, London sucks a lot of the labor down south. And we're trying to create these powerhouses up in the northern bits, Manchester, Leeds, and so on. But it's not always successful in terms of competing with London. So nationally, there are various labor market trends, but also internationally, there's huge amount of labor market trends, and multinationals take advantage of that. Cheap labor, cheap products, cheap manufacturing, these kinds of things. So again, in terms of human resource management, and we're thinking about recruitment and selection from these labor markets, and different labor markets will call for different kinds of recruitment and selection, we're thinking about a job analysis. Is that skill available in that market? Will it be a polycentric employee market, or do we need to go for ethnocentric from the home country, or do we need to go geocentric? Is the job description competitive within that market, particularly if it's going to be geocentric orientation? We're trying to attract the best talent globally, and therefore, what is the person's specification, qualification, skills, behavior, competence, cultural competencies, which we'll come back to at a later stage. Of course, again, we're thinking about the competency analysis and the competency framework. What is it that is required to deliver the strategy of the company through the human resource management resources? And again, how does that fit within all these different kind of labor markets? We're going to look at an example and some trends in a minute. And of course, this all influences and impacts on our recruitment, our selection, our appointment, and then what kind of induction is needed in order for them to be part of the company. Again, there are a tremendous amount of business factors that shape and influence and drive these kinds of decisions. So here's an example. This is from the UK. On the right-hand side, you can see the UK labour markets from 2011 to 2024. You can see that we've got a very high employment rate, always above the 70%, and therefore our unemployment rate, particularly in 2023, is really, really low, around the 4% mark. Now think about that. If you are needing a massive demand in terms of new labour, you've only got a 4% market that is unemployed, and they're probably unemployed for very good reasons. Unskilled, they may have restrictions in terms of mental health or any other kinds of disabilities, and so you would need to work with what you have. Now in other markets, there's a higher level of unemployment rate. Where I come from originally, South Africa, very young population and a very high unemployment rate. I think it's around between 30 and 40%. So you've got a lot more talent that you can draw on, particularly younger people. So think about, health and fitness and all these kind of things. But you may have quite a large unskilled labor market. So maybe more for labor trends, this would be a better place to recruit from. But in terms of skilled labor markets, you'd need to recruit from other markets. Now, the UK likes to position itself as a skilled labor market, but it doesn't allow that skill to come into the country. It's got at the moment, very restrictive entry requirements in terms of this kind of labor. Now, the reason why I say that is if you look at the graph on the left-hand side, in terms of sector influences, sector factors, you can clearly see that one of the highest sectors that needs employment is healthcare, the National Health Service. We have massive unemployment rates when it comes to doctors and nurses. And as we try and fill it with domestic markets, they get tempted away at international markets, Australia, Canada, and abroad, where they can have a higher salary, a better life balance, and better working conditions. Now, again, these are all influenced by HR practices and policies. And so again, understanding these labor markets, the movements, and where this can be moved around, all influence how human resource management responds to the company's strategy overall in terms of what it's trying to achieve. So just two examples there, and you can see how quickly and how complex this can become. So, of course, there's ideological perspectives. A neoliberal perspective, a laissez-faire free market. This comes from, for example, Margaret Thatcher and a number of other places where this was being exercised. Basically, don't interfere with the markets. Let them make their own decisions. And allow privatization and allow huge rises in capital and so on. This means that management has the right to make decisions, and you have less employee involvement and engagement. Particularly in the UK, this is when the labour unions begin to rise up. And again, if you think about the history with Margaret Thatcher and how that was reacting to these kind of markets. More on this a little bit later in some of the other sessions. But of course, the alternative is neo-corporatism. This is where the state mediates. So it's not state intervention in the sense of state control, but the state mediates, and we see this across Europe on a regular basis, where they're trying to keep all the interests in a balanced position. So you've got the two extremes. You've got where there is a strong collective pluralist view on labor. You see this particularly in the Scandinavian countries. And then the other extreme, US and the UK, very individualistic, an assumption that everybody does have the same view, because that view is pretty much what the management wants. And therefore the degree of employee voice is quite weak. And hence, a real pressure from the unions to try and get a voice in these kind of situations. It was very interesting just on the news while recording this series here in May 2024 that the Supreme Court, I think it was, threw out the case of a law change in the UK in May to restrict protests, such as labour protests as well, to restrict that voice. And they threw it out and said it's against human rights. So interesting that they are still trying to push this neoliberal extreme understanding and version of labor in these kinds of markets. So there's your introduction. Very complex. I've tried to just dip your toes in the water and give you a little bit of a feel of how these factors are overlap. You can't really pull them out separately. They all influence each other, but they really have a big impact on human resource management policies. So in our next session, session 2, we're going to dive into this in a little bit more detail, thinking about globalization and internationalization and what this means for international human resource management.